Everything about this aeroplane is enormous. The numbers are truly mind-boggling. Its overall length is 73 metres. That's about as long as the Great Sphinx in Egypt. The giant two-deck fuselage will typically have 550 seats, but has the potential to carry up to 800 passengers. The tail, at 21 metres from the ground, is as high as a 7-storey building. The 845 square metre wing area is big enough to park 70 cars. The A380 can fly a staggering 15,000 kilometres without refuelling, and in order to do that, it needs to carry 310,000 litres of fuel, making the plane's takeoff weight 560 tonnes. Incredibly though, the A380 will actually be more fuel efficient than other similar-sized jumbo jets. Airbus claim that the plane will burn about 3 litres of fuel per passenger per 100 kilometres, making it as economical to run as a family car. The building of the A380 is a remarkable example of transnational cooperation. The final assembly line is in Toulouse in France, but this is only the end of an impressively complicated process. The construction of each aircraft is the result of collaboration between France, Germany, Britain and Spain. The wings, for example, are built in England and Wales. The main sections of the fuselage are constructed in Hamburg, Germany. Parts for the nose and the tail are in fact made in Spain and only assembled in Germany. Everything is then shipped to France to be put together. The A380 jigsaw gets even more complicated, however. Although a European venture, few people realise how much of the plane is actually made or designed outside the EU. The wings, for example, were created by designers in Wichita in the United States. Some wing panels, the wheels, and most of the cockpit electronics are also made in America. In fact, in terms of actual cost, almost half the aircraft is made in the USA.
When did you begin learning English?
I studied medicine in the Netherlands for 8.5 years, and I started learning English in middle school with German and French. In my work I travel all over the world. Well, now I'm in China only for a few weeks, but I have traveled with the Red Cross to most countries in the world.
What is the Dutch approach to teaching English in medical school?
When I was at university, all of our teaching was in Dutch, but all the textbooks were in English. At the time, there was a movement going on in Holland to make all the teaching in English. I followed this movement very strongly because in my profession, it's important to communicate in English. Most of the research done in the world is in English too, so I need to be able to understand it, to evolve.
What was your initial reaction to dealing with medical journals in English?
Oh, it was difficult to read all the time in English, and I certainly had a lot to do. I still do today. I think it was difficult also because I didn't know the terms in Dutch either. I was learning the profession. Although because of the volume of reading I had to do, I soon improved my reading skills. I had to find information quickly, but be sure not to miss anything important. This helps me now when I have to do research on the internet and separate relevant from irrelevant documents.
And what do you do when confronted with a document that you find difficult to understand?
Oh, I've been a doctor for 25 years and a surgeon for 10 years, so I very rarely have problems with medical documents.
Yeah.
However, when I have to read political documents about the country I'm in, which is often the case as I travel to many war zones, I try to understand the gist. So, to do this, I look quickly over the articles and take a few notes as I read.
Do you sometimes wish you could read English better for your work, or is your level sufficient to get by?
I'm never really happy with my level, but it's enough for my work. I think I have to accept it. I have application forms to read and fill out in English, and these are a little more complicated as they don't use medical terms.
How do you actively improve your English?
Oh.
If you don't, is there a reason? Is your current level sufficient for your professional needs?
At the moment, I'm working a lot with Chinese and French people, so I'm reading a lot in French. But soon I'm going to Scotland, and there I will read more in English. I find the more I read in a foreign language, the easier it becomes, because you start recognizing more words. Basically, I can manage in English, but I never stop reading, so I'm always learning.
So, why exactly does your job have a reputation for being stressful?
Stress is generally driven by the feeling of being out of control of a situation and the feeling of a situation controlling you. Trading financial markets combines both these scenarios. Your financial position can change in a matter of seconds, and what changes that position is generally a situation beyond your control as a trader. It is possible to lose in seconds what may have taken you a year to make. It's the feeling of uncertainty, being out of control, that causes the stress.
How do you relax in the evening?
I very rarely do anything work-related, so it's easy to escape the markets. I generally go to the gym or go for a run, especially if I've had a bad day. I always cook a meal rather than have a takeaway to do something my brain would regard as creative. I find it quite therapeutic. More often than not, I will watch some TV before going to bed, as I find it helps me to wind down. If I go to bed straight after work, it's harder to sleep.
What do you do to beat stress at the weekend?
I like to be busy and active. I like the feeling of having achieved something over the weekend and it being productive. I definitely don't like wasting days. Most weekends are a mixture of household jobs like fixing something, shopping or gardening, and socialising with friends. I also go to watch Arsenal at least once a week.
Do you think what you do to relax is an effective way to beat stress?
I don't think there is a specific rule about how to beat stress. I generally find that what I do is effective for me.
Would you consider changing your job because of the high stress factor?
I have considered leaving my job due to stress-related factors. I do, however, think that an element of stress is a good thing, and if used the right way, can actually be a positive thing. It can lead to a change in direction, success, and stimulate you to do something new.
What do you enjoy about the stressful aspects of your job?
Well, having said all that, I do actually enjoy an element of uncertainty. It keeps you on your toes. I enjoy a mental challenge. Trading triggers a very wide range of emotions, second by second. How you deal with and manage those emotions dictates short, medium and long-term trading performance and success.
Do you become less stressed the longer you do the job, or does it become more stressful as you go on?
I would say it remains constant. The source and the nature of the stress changes, and how you deal with it changes due to experience, but it's always there.
Spotlight on Brazil.
This week's edition of Sustainable Cities goes to Brazil. Here's our correspondent, Sergio Nascimento, to tell us about a place that found a different way to meet some of the challenges of modern life way back in the 1970s.
Hello! I've come to somewhere that has collected numerous awards for its innovative approach to urban living, Curitiba.
Many governments are only now putting people back at the heart of city centre planning. Curitiba convinced people to stop relying on their cars several decades ago. How did they do it, Sergio?
Well, it started with an inspired and far-sighted mayor who, with a few colleagues, created what must be one of the fastest pedestrianisation schemes in history. Over the course of a weekend, they blocked off some of the city centre streets and started planting flowers with the help of local children. This overcame the opposition of the shopkeepers, who thought their businesses would suffer. They soon saw the centre could bring in far more customers than they'd had before. Popular support for a more people-friendly city grew from there.
The city itself has grown considerably since those days, I believe.
It supports a population of more than 2.5 million people today, and it shares the problems of many developing urban areas in South America. Immigration from the countryside, the pressure for housing, and so on. Yet, it has found some very original solutions. For example, instead of putting people into anonymous housing projects, it helped them to build their own homes.
Really?
By recognizing that many people already had the skills needed for construction work, it gave them support in the form of materials and advice from architects, and then let them get on with the job. That way, people have a real investment in where they live, and really want to look after the place once it's built.
Is it true that the city has one of the most extensive and efficient transport systems anywhere in the world?
Yeah, that's right. There's a whole network of different types of buses that run into and around the city in their own dedicated bus lanes. It's coordinated by the city council, but privately financed. They managed to get transport companies to provide such a comprehensive service by paying them for the number of kilometers they cover, not the number of passengers they carry. There are buses every minute in the rush hour, so the system can carry something like 2 million people. That's more than in New York.
And they connect everywhere to everywhere else.
Neighborhoods, to workplaces, to hospitals, to tourist attractions. Nearly 70% of all journeys are by bus. The whole system pays for itself, and it's been developed largely on the existing streets, without knocking down buildings, so the character of the neighborhoods is maintained.
Have they forgotten about cyclists?
No. There's a network of about 150 kilometers of cycle paths around the city. And parallel to the transport systems, they've developed a network of Farois de Saber, or lighthouses of knowledge.
What are they?
They're free educational centres placed around the city, which have libraries, internet access, and other cultural resources. People can get help with job training, social welfare, and access to educational programs. Another thing they're keen on are the tree planting initiatives and the development of green spaces. They even use sheep to keep the grass down. It is much cheaper and it helps regenerate the soil.
And the secret to all this is planning.
It's not only planning, it's involving local people in decision-making from the start. Public participation has ensured that the system has continued, even though the man who started it all is no longer mayor.
Fascinating. Now, tell us about the recycling programme, Sergio.
Today, I'm going to talk about business and ethics. First, I'll look at what is meant by business ethics. Then, I'll examine the kind of ethical considerations companies need to address, how they can go about doing business in a more ethical way, and look at some examples of ethical business practices. So, what are business ethics, and why are they seen as important in today's business climate? Business ethics relate to how a company conducts its business in order to make a profit. Although the primary goal of the company may be to make money, it also recognizes that it has a responsibility towards the society in which it operates. The term corporate social responsibility is often used, and nowadays many companies have strong corporate social responsibility programs designed to help create a prosperous, inclusive society. Now I'll look at some basic ethical considerations that a company needs to address. The first area is how the company treats its employees. All employees should be treated fairly and with respect. A company that cares for its workers' welfare will tend to have a happier workforce and a lower turnover of staff. It is also important that workers are recruited on a basis of equal opportunity. The second area is how a company conducts its day-to-day business. In a manufacturing business, this includes how suppliers of raw materials are chosen and treated. A good example of this is the Fair Trade movement. This initiative ensures that small-scale farmers are paid directly and at a fair price for their crops. A company should also look at its policy on paying suppliers and ensure that payments are made on time. Another ethical consideration is the impact the business has on the environment. Manufacturing companies should strive to ensure that production is clean and careful, and look for ways to minimize energy consumption and waste products. Finally, a company can also decide to give something back to the community it operates in. This can be in the form of corporate giving programs, where donations are given to community projects, or by initiating schemes to improve the local community and encouraging employees to work on these schemes.
Change management.
Hi, Sue. How are things?
Fine, yeah.
OK, now, about the change in your work routine, you're going to work Saturdays from next month.
Yes, but why should I have to work on Saturdays? No one's told me why this is necessary.
I'm sorry, this should have been explained to you. We get a lot of people calling now on Saturdays for information about our products. It's important that we answer these questions. Is that OK? Any more questions?
No. OK.
Great. Well, how's your course coming along? You're learning how to make websites.
The course is great. It's not that difficult. I'm helping my son make a website at home. It's fun.
Great. You'll be able to work on our site soon then.
Sure. What's happening in the other departments? Is someone there working on Saturdays too?
I'm afraid I can't tell you that at the moment. Because they're different departments, I can't say, really.
Are there any other courses I can take after the website designer course finishes?
There are one or two that could be useful. Let's talk again about this once you've finished the web course.
OK. You know, Bob, I'd like to ask you something. It's good that you take the time to talk to me about my work and things. But don't you think it'd be a good idea to talk things through together? You know, have a meeting with everyone in our department, see what everybody thinks, all together. If we talk things through together, I think we could come up with some great ideas on how to improve things here.
I agree, Sue. It would be good for everyone to meet together, especially now that we've got so many changes coming along. You know, the problem is that we haven't got a room big enough for us all to meet together, so...
It was just an idea.
Asha, chaos theory seems to be a branch of physics or mathematics. You're an economist, so how does it influence your line of work?
Well, in a number of ways. I'm responsible for financial development programs in many parts of the world, so forecasting long-range trends and making predictions on the basis of present evidence is what I do. A chaos theory was developed by scientists trying to explain the movement of the planets and changes in environmental conditions. Both of these things are also about making long-term predictions on the basis of present evidence.
Are many economists involved in this field?
An increasing number. In the 1990s, a lot of economists began to look at chaos theory as a way of providing models for forecasting.
What kind of models are we talking about here?
Well, that's a good question because, of course, the basic idea of chaos theory is that there aren't any models as such. There aren't guaranteed forms, but rather patterns of change and development.
Doesn't that mean that forecasting is impossible?
No, but it certainly makes it more of a challenge. Mandelbrot, who did the experiment with stock exchange prices, for example, noted that although the outcomes were variable, there were in fact certain constants. What we have to do is make sure we know what these are and take into account all the possible variables.
But do economics and finance work in the same way as weather conditions or the movement of plants?
Well, no, of course not. But there are certain underlying similarities. In the past, people thought of these things as linear systems. Now we know they're not.
What do you mean by linear system?
Well, for example, in a classic linear system, if I do A, then I know that B will happen and C will occur as a result of this, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But according to chaos theory, a number of variables can change what will happen between A and B, and then between B and C.
Sounds complicated.
Yes. Well, it is complicated. There's no escaping that. However, a lot of what chaos theory teaches us is simply about accepting uncertainty. We have to accept uncertainty. We can't guarantee that things will turn out as we planned them when working with complex, non-linear systems, nor sometimes with simple systems.
Cinema and politics.
You may have heard recently about what is being called the return of political cinema, following recent releases such as Munich and The Constant Gardener. So today I'm going to look at what political cinema is and give a little overview of the history of political filmmaking in Hollywood. First of all, what do I mean by political cinema or political films? To me, the terms refer to films that make people aware of political or social situations. To give a recent example, the film Hotel Rwanda caused many people to take notice of the political situation in Rwanda for perhaps the first time. The dramatic imagery of film can often be far more powerful than news reports. For many, the heyday of political filmmaking was the 1970s. Watergate, the Vietnam War, and mainstream actors with social consciences such as Jane Fonda, Robert Redford and Warren Beatty made for a number of political films. Think of All the President's Men, which detailed the scale of corruption in Watergate, or Apocalypse Now, which graphically portrayed the horror of the Vietnam War. Political filmmaking didn't start in the 70s, though. Back in the 1940s and 50s, Hollywood produced films detailing social problems such as unemployment and alcoholism. In 1967, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, a comedy about a white couple whose daughter brings home a black fiancé, covered what was then pretty much a taboo subject, that of interracial relationships. As I said, the 70s saw a sudden increase in political films, which carried on to some extent into the 80s, with the release of films such as Gandhi, which won 8 Oscars, and Cry Freedom, another Attenborough film, this time about Steve Biko, a South African activist who died in police custody. The 90s is not generally seen as a good decade for political cinema. Schindler's List, Spielberg's powerful film about the Holocaust, stands out, as does Malcolm X, a biography of the Black American activist. Which brings us to the present decade, and the so-called revival of the political...
Cities, cities, cities. For the first time ever, more people now live in cities than in the countryside.
Hello, and welcome to Visions of the Future. This week, we're discussing the growth of cities in the 21st century. In the studio, we have the environmentalist Sue Shaw and Masako Ito, an urban planner based in Tokyo. For the first time in human history, more people now live in cities than in the countryside. Today, Tokyo is the world's largest conurbation. The combined cities of the Tokyo Bay Area now have a population of 28 million. Masako, How has Tokyo solved the problem of transport?
Well, many Tokyo residents would say that the city's transport problems have not been solved. Tokyo is different from most cities in developing countries because it has many suburban railway lines. These lines bring commuters to the Yamamote Line, the circular line around the city centre, and to the city's 12 subway lines.
Rail travel seems to be the answer.
Yes, it is really. In addition, there are expensive tolls on the city's urban expressways. Train travel is 1.5 times faster than travel by car, and city centre parking is very expensive.
Right. So Tokyoites don't use cars that much?
Well, you know, before you can buy a car in Tokyo, you must prove that you have a place to park it. Parking spaces can cost as much as apartments to rent. New roads are built in Tokyo, but priority is given to new train lines.
So the train is king in Tokyo, Sue. Anything to add?
Tokyo is a good model for our future megacities to aspire to, but, and this is a big but, Japan is a wealthy country, and most of the rail system was present before Tokyo developed, or was built as the city grew. Most of our new megacities will be in Asia and Africa, where the resources to develop a transport infrastructure similar to Tokyo's just aren't present.
What can these cities do?
They must do all they can to stop the car from becoming the main means of transport. Cars bring pollution, and the construction of new roads can destroy the fabric of a city as they divide communities and lead to the building of new types of housing, usually high apartment blocks.
So,
Integrated transport systems that take into consideration local factors are the answer. Take Kolkata, for example. There, hand-pulled rickshaws are being included in the plans for the transport system alongside buses and trams. Bangkok and Manila have built overhead rail systems. These are cheaper and quicker to build than expensive underground subway lines.
So for the future megacities, the message is forget about cars.
Most definitely.
I'd agree with that too.
Dr. Grant, could you explain in a few words what the greenhouse effect actually means?
Well, in simple terms, the sun heats the Earth's surface and the Earth radiates energy back out into space. Some of the radiation gets trapped in the atmosphere by greenhouse gases. This trapped radiation warms the atmosphere and some of it goes back down to the Earth, making it hotter than normal. This is the greenhouse effect.
So, is carbon dioxide the problem?
Yes, and other gases too. Methane being released from paddy fields, commercial oil and gas from landfills, vegetation left to rot without oxygen. These days, there are more greenhouse gases than ever because of human activities, and especially the burning of fossil fuels.
What kind of problems do scientists foresee?
Well, ice caps melting and sea levels rising mean that eventually cities like London, New York, Sydney and Tokyo will be submerged. This is difficult to imagine, of course.
It seems incredible. No wonder scientists are worried.
Well, some scientists are optimistic. They believe that positive feedbacks from ice clouds and their water vapour could have an impact on global warming. Other scientists are more sceptical. They suspect that we have been wrong in our initial analyses of the situation and might need to go back to the drawing board.
So, are you saying that some scientists don't believe in the greenhouse effect?
No, I wouldn't go that far. In fact, without the greenhouse effect, the planet would be frozen and no life forms would exist.
Is there anything that could protect us from global warming?
I'm glad you asked me that. Yes, volcanoes. When a volcano erupts, it throws debris up into the stratosphere. This protects the Earth from solar energy by scattering the sunlight. Of course, the best thing that we can do is to address the problem seriously on a world level. That's where the Kyoto Treaty enters the picture. If all of the governments in the world would commit themselves to making a real effort to work together on this issue, we might be able to slow down the process and work out a solution.
So, how worried do we need to be?
That depends. First of all, global warming isn't going to affect all areas of the planet to the same degree. Things like the collapse of glaciers take hundreds of years, so we are talking about a slow process here.
Slow enough for us to do something to prevent a catastrophe?
Well, let's hope so.
Art and Business is an organisation that develops creative partnerships between business and the arts. Peter Jones is going to talk about the company's ideas and tell us about some of their success stories. Peter, maybe you could begin by telling our listeners why Art and Business was created.
Well, in the 21st century, productivity is no longer a matter of machines. The success of a company depends on its people and on the creativity of its people. It makes sense that the way to increase productivity is to stimulate creativity.
And what better way to stimulate creativity than through reading books?
Exactly. Every reader knows that a good book can stimulate the imagination and the intellect, get you thinking along lines you might not have thought of before, open up new worlds.
So, have you had any help in setting up the project?
Yes. The London Libraries Agency and an organisation called the Reading Partnership work with us on this project. We're trying to use the power of the written word to motivate staff in the workplace. In a recent survey, 700 business leaders were asked which book had inspired them and had a positive influence on their career. They were able to choose any kind of book, any kind at all. Only about 40% chose a business book. Most people chose a work of fiction, a novel, a play, or even poetry.
How can reading help somebody to become a more creative worker?
Successful managers need to be well-rounded people. They need active imaginations. When they interpret fictional scenarios, they are using their creativity. Readers combine imaginative skills with critical and analytical skills.
Are we talking about the right and left sides of the brain?
Yes. Our logical left side of the brain interprets the language of a book. The creative right side looks at the forms of expression. The left side analyses the plot, while the right side is more interested in the relationships between characters, the emotional aspects.
How does this transfer to the world of business?
Creative ideas make businesses more competitive. Shared reading experiences improve communication and morale at work.
Can you give listeners some examples of how this scheme has been brought successfully into the workplace?
Employees at W.H. Smith have stuck poems and quotations above their desks for inspiration.
Well, W.H. Smith deals in books. What about other examples?
The telecommunications company Orange set up a project called Talk Books at Work. They discovered that encouraging employees to read helped them to develop their linguistic and interpersonal skills. Marks & Spencer has set up reading groups at work. The groups cut across the usual hierarchies, and working relationships have improved greatly.
Spotlight on England.
The symbols of England. Well, one of England's symbols that you will recognise from football shirts around the world is the St George's Cross, a red cross on a white background. This is the English flag, and it's also incorporated into the Union Jack, the flag of Great Britain. The design for the flag can be traced back to the 11th century, when the English soldiers taking part in the Holy Crusades used to wear it into battle, although it was not until 1277 that the flag was officially declared the national flag of England. They adopted the cross at the same time as they adopted St George himself to be the patron saint of England. He was actually a 4th century Christian martyr. St George's Day on April the 23rd is England's national day, but it's not widely celebrated. Let's move on to plants and flowers. While Wales has the daffodil and the leek, Scotland the thistle and Northern Ireland the shamrock, England's flower is, of course, the rose. Everybody talks about the English rose. We are used to seeing the red rose as an insignia on the England national rugby team's shirts, and it is this red rose that we usually associate with England. But the white rose is also linked to England and is used on different occasions. When we sometimes refer to a certain type of woman as being an English rose, we are talking about an unflawed complexion, fair skin, and a faint blush of pink about the cheeks, the colours of the roses that we find in gardens all over the nation. Besides a cross and a rose, England also has a third symbol, the 3 lions. Once again, the national football team wears the 3 lions on the pitch, and so does the English national cricket team, of course. And what about music, you may ask? Isn't there a national anthem? Well, England doesn't have an official anthem of its own, but over the years the hymn Jerusalem has become associated with the nation and has taken on the role of national anthem. We hear it played at sporting events and even at royal weddings or funerals. Jerusalem was originally written in 1804 as a poem by William Blake, and the music was composed later by Hubert Parry in 1916. It might be fitting to end this talk by listening to the words of what has become England's national hymn. Jerusalem. And did those feet in ancient time walk upon England's mountains green? And was the holy Lamb of God on England's pleasant pastures seen? And did the countenance divine shine forth upon our clouded hills? And was Jerusalem builded here among these dark satanic mills? Bring me my bow of burning gold, bring me my arrows of desire. Bring me my spear, O clouds unfold, bring me my chariot of fire. I will not cease from mental fight, nor shall my sword sleep in my hand till we have built Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land.
Engineering project.
These days, engineers, rather than setting out to create new inventions, work on refining designs that already exist. These refinements can be related to size, shape, increased power, or more efficiency, and usually we are talking about a combination of these refinements. Let's take the motor as an example. You are probably all familiar with the name Michael Faraday, who invented the electric motor in the 1820s. Well, the first motor was a fairly simple device, and we have been improving on its design and looking for new applications for it ever since its birth. These days, there are endless projects going on around the globe where engineers are trying to modify existing motors in order to be able to use them in new contexts, and in traditional contexts, but with better, more efficient results. In Faraday's time, engineers and scientists had a more or less free rein when it came to experimenting and research. If they had enough money to carry out their plans, then there was nothing to stop them. Now, these days, engineers have to take into consideration all kinds of environmental issues. We are driven by different quests. To conserve energy is one of the most important. Industry demands quality and efficiency, but we must never forget the environmental issues that lie behind every single engineering advance. So, back to motors. What's happening at the moment is very exciting. A new kind of motor has been developed which uses internal permanent magnets embedded within the rotor. These magnets improve the motor's flux density and torque density. What does this mean? Well, for a start, the motors use less energy, considerably less than traditional motors. This is because there is less heat loss. A side effect of this is that the machines using the new motors have increased precision. Size and speed are two further aspects. The new motors are a lot smaller and speed control is more efficient. This is especially important when we use the motors in gearboxes or cranes, for example. Omron has just developed a motor with an internal magnet that is being applied to high-power applications, things like huge industrial plants and building projects. There is already talk of using the new motors to replace the ones currently used in hydraulic systems. Yaskawa Electric is one of the world's largest manufacturers of motors. They have developed a motor with a power rating of 55 kilowatts and a rated speed of 1500 RPM. This is much greater power than we have seen up till now. So, motors are increasing in power and decreasing in size. In the world of engineering, this is a notable achievement.
From the number of emails we get, we know that a lot of our listeners are studying online, so they'll be interested to hear what our next guest has to say. Mark McGray is a lecturer at Manchester University, whose specialist area is online moderation. Mark, what makes moderators different from teachers in a classroom?
Hi, June.
Hi.
I think the first point is that, online or not, the most important thing is well-designed learning goals and objectives.
Right.
The use of technology is secondary to getting the learning goals right. But having said that, there obviously are differences between online and face-to-face learning.
Yes.
Just as an example, people often like classroom teachers who make them laugh. But trying to be funny in computer conferencing is a dangerous business and often not very successful.
Why is that?
Mainly because when you're just reading text, you can't hear the person's tone of voice or see their face. It's much easier to misunderstand.
This whole thing about communicating only through text on a computer screen, don't you find that impossible?
No, it's not impossible, it's just different. Right. Online communication can either be synchronous, when all the people in the class are online at the same time, or asynchronous, where they aren't and people can post in their own time. And the moderator's role is different for each of those situations. Like teachers, moderators will praise people or point out to people where they may be going wrong, although they may do it privately, away from the main forum. What they won't do, and will discourage others from doing, is lecturing. Very long posts, even if they're interesting and well-argued, don't usually get a good response. It's very difficult to do that online.
What if people argue? Does that happen?
It does. As I said, it's much easier to have misunderstandings when communication is all text-based, and people will occasionally flame each other.
Flame?
Oh, sorry. Flaming is what happens when one person attacks another person online.
Oh.
It doesn't happen very often, and
how do you deal with it?
well, it's up to the moderator to set the rules for how people interact. The netiquette, we call it. And if someone breaks those rules, the moderator will talk to him or her privately and remind them of how we should deal with each other.
Right.
It's the same with lurkers who aren't participating actively. The moderator may decide to talk to them privately and check they're okay.
As you would in a classroom.
Exactly. In fact, the aim of moderators is to make the technology transparent.
Right.
So people don't notice it's there. It's very different from the traditional classroom, but there's no reason why it shouldn't be just as effective. Even more so for some people.
Football management.
Paul, can you tell me how you got interested in being a football manager?
Yes, well, I started out as a professional footballer. I played for quite a few clubs in the lower leagues, and I even had a trial at Manchester United, although nothing came of it. In my last club, the manager encouraged me to do some coaching, which I really enjoyed, and that's when I thought maybe I could make it as a manager.
So, what happened next?
I started working for my coaching licence, and then I heard about a certificate in football management and applied for a place on the course.
I've always thought that most managers just learn on the job. Were you not tempted to just give it a go anyway?
Not really. I've seen so many managers come and go, and a lot of them, to be honest, weren't really that good at their job. And I'm your typical footballer. I left school at 16, so I haven't had that much of an education. I didn't feel confident that I could deal with things like finance and negotiating with people.
And is that the kind of thing you learn on this course?
Yes. It really covers everything you need to know. Leadership skills, talking to the media, handling pressure, public speaking. I've got a lot more confidence and I'm really looking forward to my first managerial job.
How does the course work in practice? I believe you're working as well as studying.
That's right. After I got my coaching licence, I got a job as a coach with a second division team. It's no problem combining work with studying, though. In fact, you need to be playing or working in football to get on the course. It fits in well, because most of the course takes place during 2 summer schools, one at the beginning and one at the end of the course. There are a few workshops during the year which we fit around our schedules. So really, I'm learning on the job. I can put into practice what I've learnt.
And finally, would you recommend this route into football management?
Yes, most definitely. I think all managers, even existing ones, should do the course.
Martina.
It depends what I'm doing. I can listen to music of any kind when I'm doing a translation. I like it. It helps me even. But if I'm doing some complex math, then I have to have silence. It depends on the level of concentration it's needed, I guess.
Rachel.
No, it has to be complete silence for me. It's a real problem, actually, because I live in a shared house with lots of other students in the middle of a noisy city. It's very difficult to get real peace and quiet. When I can, I go back to my parents who live out in the country. It's good when I have lots of exams to study for because it's so peaceful out there. No disturbances at all.
Romesh.
A bit of background buzz in the office is essential for me. I like working in a lively atmosphere. People around, chat, the radio on perhaps. It generates an energy which I find helps me concentrate. I once came into work on a Sunday when I had a big project to finish off. The deadline was the next day, and I thought it would be quiet on a Sunday, no one else around. Well, it was quiet, and there was no one here. And you know what? It drove me mad. I couldn't stand it.
Mark.
I can't stand noise or distractions of any kind when I'm trying to concentrate, though I realise it's essential in a busy working environment. However, I have my quiet hour, between 3 and 4 every afternoon. People know not to disturb me, except in an emergency. No phone calls, mobile switched off, door shut. It's a good strategy. I get most of my work done in that time. I'm not distracted by troubleshooting problems.
John.
We always have music on while we work. People are often surprised to hear it, but my job is actually quite routine and boring. Of course, it takes skill and knowledge, but the experience I have means that most of the time there's absolutely no problem. I think we put music on to combat the boredom rather than aid concentration. And we put on something very fast, like The Ride of the Valkyries, when there's a backlog of work to do, and we have to get through the patients very quickly.
Mahesh, you trained as a classical Indian musician, but now you spend most of your time playing records in nightclubs. They're two very different things.
Well, yes, they are. The two worlds are very different, but there is something that connects them.
And what's that?
Rhythm. An interest in rhythm. Rhythm is fundamental to everything that I do, whether it's the rhythmic section of a classical Indian raga or some Asian underground electronic beats in a club.
And you mix the two things, don't you?
Yes, I've played live tabla to electronic accompaniment in clubs in Europe.
How has that gone down?
Really well. I think people are getting bored of ordinary clubs and faceless DJs. Some live music is a great addition.
And have you tried DJing for a classical Indian audience, on the other hand?
No, I'm not quite sure the world's ready for that yet. Still, it's an interesting idea.
How are audiences for your music different in India and in Europe?
Well, the classical audiences are far more sedate in Europe than in India.
How do you mean?
Well, in the West, people think they have to respect the music, and to show their respect, they all sit there very quietly, as if they are at a museum or something.
And in India?
People participate much more. They'll clap when they appreciate something and shout when they don't.
Finally, Mahesh, what does the future hold for you?
A new record in the autumn. Then next year I'm looking forward to a new collaboration with some Latin American musicians. I'm always looking for new frontiers.
So, what is it that makes a businessman or businesswoman influential?
Well, first we ought to think about what we mean by influential. Lots of business people enjoy success, but relatively few become influential, really have an influence on the people around them, on society, on the world.
OK, so who would you say were influential? What names come to mind?
Well, sometimes it isn't the names that come to mind, sometimes it's the product. Obviously, we've got the big names, Bill Gates, Henry Ford, people like that. Sometimes the names are not familiar at all, like Sam Walton.
Sam who?
Exactly. Sam Walton was the man who perfected the idea of the discount store. The Walmart stores are his. It's the biggest chain of retailers in the world. And in the States, Walmart employs more than 1.3 million people.
Wow, he's a rich man.
He was. He died in 1992, but yes, his heirs are worth more than $100 billion. That's more than Bill Gates. If he was alive today, he'd probably be the richest man in the world.
So, he invented the discount store.
No, and that's another point. He didn't invent the discount store, he just perfected it. Sometimes a great idea is already out there, and it takes a great mind to see the potential and to turn the idea around. Other successful business people take an idea that's already a success and just change the context.
I'm not sure that I follow you.
Well, earlier we mentioned Henry Ford. He invented the assembly line. He used it to produce cars.
Yes.
Well, Ray Kroc...
Oh, the McDonald's guy?
Yes. Well, what he did was to take Ford's idea of the assembly line and bring it into the kitchen. The initial idea was there, he just adapted it.
So, let's go back to my original question. What sets these people apart from ordinary business people? What makes them so influential?
Well, I suppose there are a number of factors. First of all, there is an element of luck.
Being in the right place at the right time.
Yes, but obviously that's not enough in itself. You have to be able to see a gap in the market. Sometimes a certain amount of business training or experience is necessary for that.
OK, so we're talking about an idea, having an idea that would fill a gap.
Yes. For an idea to be successful, you have to do a lot of forward planning, a lot of thinking. Sometimes these great business people have an idea for years and years, decades even, before it's actually put into action.
OK, what else? What other things are necessary?
Well, great business people have to be prepared to take big risks.
What do you mean?
Well, for every great idea that works, there are probably hundreds or thousands that don't. You have to be prepared to deal with failures as well as successes.
And I suppose that implies having a certain amount of money at your disposal?
Yes. Business people would need to invest both time and money.
So does that mean that all influential business people are also rich?
No, that doesn't necessarily follow. If you've got a really good business plan and a firm idea of how to make it work, then you stand a chance of convincing others to invest in you. So, I suppose we could say that having a convincing nature is also a requirement.
The gift of the gab.
Indeed, the gift of the gab.
Hello. Today on Business Focus, I am talking about knowledge management with Miss Twomey, who is the Human Resource Manager for a large multinational company. Miss Twomey, has knowledge management changed the way your company works?
Oh yes. Since adopting knowledge management strategies, we have had to make many changes to the way we work. From changing the technology we use and the way we use it, to changing people's ideas about the best way to work.
And what has been the biggest challenge?
Without a doubt, it has been trying to get our staff to accept and adopt knowledge management practices. This was a tough challenge because our company had a culture which was not particularly open to the idea of knowledge management. So I would say definitely the people side required the biggest change.
You mention a company culture. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Oh, yes, certainly. Imagine you start work for a particular company. In the beginning, you're not sure what you can and can't do. For example, can I go for a coffee break at 11? Or who should I speak to if I have a problem with the computer? Over time, you see what your fellow colleagues do, you take their lead, and you adapt your way of working to how the other employees in that company work. You learn what is acceptable behaviour for that company. One of the best definitions of company culture is, it's the way things are done round here.
Why did your company culture create such a challenge when adopting knowledge management?
Well, knowledge management is often about knowledge sharing. The company wants to be able to make the useful knowledge that one person has available for other people to use. However, people can be very protective of what they know. There is prestige in being a recognised expert and having people ask you for your help. Obviously, if you share your knowledge so that it's freely available to everyone, you're giving up some of that prestige. And you may also feel that you're giving up some power. You may think that your knowledge is the reason why you have a job in the first place. So for a company, it's obviously not enough just to say, well, now we think you should share your knowledge. And in our company, experts did have status. And there was also considerable prestige gained by thinking up new, original ideas, rather than reusing the good ideas which worked for other people in other offices. So, in these two areas of trying to implement knowledge management strategies, that of sharing knowledge and that of reusing knowledge, our company culture, the way we did things round here, had to change.
How were you able to overcome these problems?
Well, first we had to make sure that our people understood the competitive advantage the company stood to gain if we changed our way of working. We organised staff meetings in each of our offices to introduce the aims of the KM strategies we were going to adopt. We also set up a group of knowledge management champions throughout our network of offices. The duty of the champions was to help get people on board and enthusiastic about KM, and to be a point of reference on KM for the local offices. The champions were fundamental to spreading the KM message and also provided an important link between HQ and local offices. As well as the personnel aspect of KM, we also had to bring in new technology to help us. We set up special pages on our intranet, which provided information on what was happening in our offices, and we asked employees to advertise their fields of experience and interest so that it became much easier to find the knowledge we needed. We put these on a special database, which everyone had access to. We also invested in new technology which made having online conferences easier to organise.
It sounds like it was a lot of work.
Indeed it was. And in the beginning, there were some problems and hiccups. But we are really seeing the benefits of implementing knowledge management now, as there is greater communication between the offices and people are realising that if we all work together, we can achieve much better results.
Well, thank you, Miss Twomey, for agreeing to talk to us about knowledge management. That is all for today from Business Focus. Next week, we should be talking to the managing director of a chemical company who has made great success.
Leadership.
Good afternoon, everyone. Now, you're all group leaders with some responsibilities for people working in your teams. In today's training session, I want us to think about what makes a good leader in the workplace. Is that okay?
Alison, are we talking about managers here or all colleagues?
I'd like to talk about colleagues in general, anyone in the workplace. I don't want to limit the discussion solely to managers. Is that okay?
Yeah,
fine.
Sure.
Ian, would you like to kick off? What qualities should a good leader have?
Well, you know, I think the most important thing is to practice what you preach. You know, you can't go around telling people to do something in one way and then you do it in a completely different way. You got to be a good role model for people.
Okay, thanks. Sue, any other ideas?
Well, I agree with Ian there. I just want to say that I don't like managers who blame other people for their own mistakes. I know we're not just talking about managers. I think it's important for everybody to take responsibility for what they do. No one's perfect. Everyone makes mistakes. I think you should trust people and just admit it if something hasn't worked out. Managers too. I mean, they're only human, aren't they? Well, some of them anyway.
Okay, so we're talking about trusting colleagues and being responsible for your work. Okay, fine. Wendy, any thoughts?
Let's see. For me, I think if you want people to be on your side, you know, if you want to influence people, you have to communicate and communicate well. You've got to let people know what's happening and what's going to happen, even if some of these things aren't very nice. There's nothing worse than finding out about something from coffee machine gossip. Managers should tell it straight.
Okay, thanks, Wendy. That's very useful. So, to be a good leader, you've got to be a good role model. You should accept responsibility for your own mistakes, and you should communicate well and tell it straight, even if the news is bad. Now, can you think about some other ideas? eBay. A global phenomenon. Why is it so successful?
Welcome, everybody, to today's seminar. If I remember correctly, David, you'll be leading the seminar?
Yes, that's right.
Fine. And how about questions? Shall we keep these to the end, or would you like people to interrupt during your presentation?
Thanks. If anyone has a question, just ask straight away.
Fine. Let's go then.
Right. eBay is an enormously successful company. It's a household word in several countries. In 2005, it had a turnover of $4.55 billion, and it employed 11,600 people. It's achieved all of this in just 11 years. What's the secret of eBay's success? I think the key issue here is that eBay couldn't exist without the internet. You know, there aren't many examples of companies like this. Take Amazon, for example. If you don't feel like switching your computer on, you can always go round to the nearest bookshop. But if you want to sell your old magazines to somebody in Germany, eBay's the only way to do it. Without the net's ability to bring buyers and sellers together from different locations, there would be no eBay. So this is big point number one. Now let's move on to point two. The founders of eBay, Meg Whitman, the CEO, like all of the senior staff, already had a successful business background. She brought in an experienced management team. They had a great idea, but it had to be a great profitable idea. Around this, the importance of profitability, they built their business model. Let's move on to point three, sound business management. Did you hear of eBay during the dot-com boom years? Not a lot. They were busy building their customer base and making money. They didn't feature in stories headlining the excesses of the dot-com boom years. Actually, I'll add another point. Point four. eBay doesn't produce, sell, or ship anything itself. It provides the online marketplace for other people to do this. This gives it enormous financial power.
David, can I ask a question?
Sure.
What difference does that make? The point about eBay not making anything itself?
Well, this means that they can use their capital very effectively. You know, their capital isn't tied up in buildings, factories, warehouses, that sort of thing. Again, their capital isn't tied up in things that are waiting to be sold. They haven't got shops all over the world with sales assistants in them. All this costs. See what I mean?
Sure, I get it now.
Great. Now, the only problem they've run into... Actually, that's not true. They've had a couple of major problems. Anyway, the first problem... They arrived in a couple of key markets too late. This happened in Japan and Hong Kong, where Yahoo's online marketplace had a head start. The other problem, well, it's the sort of thing we've all heard about. Buyers receiving stolen goods, or a product different from the one they thought they'd bought, or no product at all. Sellers putting in false bids to increase the price just before an auction finishes. eBay admits this happens, but says that this sort of thing accounts for a very small percentage of all sales. OK, now I'd like to have a look at just how the company has expanded over the last 11 years.
Economy and social science.
Good afternoon and welcome to Modern Times. On today's show, we'll be talking about the boomerang generation. That's the new term that's being used to describe the phenomenon of young people, such as university graduates, who move back home to live with their parents. According to recent research, there are now approximately 6.8 million over 18-year-olds living with their parents in the UK. To talk about the reasons for this trend, I have with me in the studio today Helen Campbell, lecturer in economics at Thames University. Hello, Helen.
Good afternoon, David.
So, Helen, what is causing this trend of the so-called boomerang generation?
That's a good question. You see, there are a number of social and economic factors at play here. Firstly, as we all know, student loans have largely replaced the old university grant system in the UK. And as a result, student debt has risen steadily each year. According to the most recent figures, the level of debt rose again last year by 18.7%.
18.7%? But what does that mean in real terms?
Well, let's take the average graduate today. She's now likely to start her working life owing about £12,000 to the bank.
I see. That's certainly a lot of money for a young person.
Yes, and that's why so many young people are now moving back in with their families when they finish university, or choosing to stay in the parental home while they study. The other important factor that is behind this trend is the high cost of housing nowadays. It's an extremely hard time for first-time buyers. You know, the average person now has to save for 5 years to get a deposit on a home.
How much of a deposit will they need?
According to a recent bank survey, about £24,000, and it seems the average first-time buyer is likely to be 33 years old these days.
Does this mean that young people are going to be more financially dependent on their parents for longer?
Well, it certainly looks that way. It makes sense for people to save money on rent and live with their parents for a few years at least. The survey has found that less than half the 6.8 million who are now living with their parents are paying rent, and many of them receive weekly allowances from their parents.
Thank you, Helen. Well, it seems that in the past the trend has always been for each generation to be better off than the previous one. But it looks like this trend may not continue into the next generation. Our lines are now open to callers who want to discuss the boomerang generation with us. Call 0845...
E-economy.
I'd like to look at a vital aspect of e-commerce, and that is the nature of the product or service. There are certain products and services that are very suitable for selling online, and others that simply don't work. Suitable products generally have a high value-to-weight ratio. Items such as CDs and DVDs are obvious examples. Books, although heavier and so more expensive to post, still have a high enough value-to-weight ratio, as the success of Amazon, which started off selling only books, shows. Laptop computers are another good product for selling online. Digital products such as software, films and music can be sold in a purely virtual environment. The goods are paid for by online transactions and then downloaded onto the buyer's computer. There are no postage or delivery costs, so prices can be kept low. Many successful virtual companies provide digital services, such as financial transactions, in the case of PayPal, or means of communication, as Skype does. The key to success here is providing an easy-to-use, reliable service. Do this and you can easily become the market leader, as Skype has proved. Products which are potentially embarrassing to buy also do well in the virtual environment. Some of the most profitable e-commerce companies are those selling pornography and other sex-related products or services. For a similar reason, online gambling is highly popular. Products which are usually considered unsuitable for selling online include those that have a taste or smell component. Food, especially fresh food, falls into this category, along with perfume. Clothes and other items that need to be tried on, such as jewellery, are generally not suited to virtual retailing. And of course, items with a low value-to-weight ratio. There are exceptions, though. Online grocery shopping has really taken off, with most major supermarkets offering the service. The inconvenience of not being able to see the food you're buying is outweighed by the time saved and convenience of having the goods delivered. Typical users of online supermarkets include the elderly, people who work long hours, and those without their own transport.
Alcohol abuse.
Thanks for coming along to the studio today, Damien. We're going to talk about alcohol, and more to the point, alcohol abuse, what we've come to know as binge drinking.
Yes, thanks for inviting me, Anne.
We keep hearing about cases of binge drinking in the newspapers, on television, in magazines, and on radio chat shows like this one. But what exactly is binge drinking? What does the term mean? Is there a difference between binge drinking and just plain old getting drunk?
Well, the British Medical Association states that there is no consensus on the definition of binge drinking. In the past, we used the term binge drinking to refer to an extended period of time, a couple of days, for example, when a person would continue to drink alcohol to such an extent that he or she would abandon their usual activities, such as work, or, in the case of younger drinkers, classes. In medical terms, we usually agree that binge drinking refers to the thresholds that we have for holding our drink.
But isn't binge drinking all about drinking lots of alcohol in a short space of time? And don't we usually think of young people when we hear the term used? People who shouldn't really be drinking alcohol in the first place.
Well, you are right about the first point. In common usage, probably because of all the recent media coverage, binge drinking has come to mean a heavy bout of drinking in just one evening, or a similar time span. Another factor is the intention.
The intention?
Yes. The fact that binge drinkers actually set out to get drunk. That's their goal, what they're trying to do. Binge drinkers aren't usually solitary drinkers. They drink in groups, sometimes very large groups, especially in the case of teenagers. And binge drinkers are getting younger and younger, if you believe what you read in the press.
So, let's get this clear. Large groups of kids get together with the sole intention of getting drunk.
In a nutshell, yes.
And is binge drinking a particularly British problem? Surely young people drink in other countries too.
Yes, you're right. Lots of countries have problems with youngsters drinking. But it does seem as though the UK is taking a particular interest in the problem. Let's say that here, in Britain, we see binge drinking as a huge social problem. In other countries, it's perceived as less of a problem.
And should we be worried? Is it a problem?
Well, that depends. I certainly think so, yes. In 2003, the cost of binge drinking was estimated as £20 billion. The figure will have risen considerably since then, I'm sure. In 2005, the government released figures from the Health Service that suggested that 1 million accident and emergency admissions each year are a direct result of alcohol consumption. And the emergency services report that Friday and Saturday nights they can hardly cope with the demand for attention.
So, why are the British so notorious when it comes to binge drinking? Are we worse than other European countries?
The culture of drinking in the UK is very different from other countries like France, Spain, or Italy. In most mainland European countries, children grow up seeing alcohol consumed slowly. A drop of wine with a meal. The odd beer on a sunny afternoon. In the UK, we go out to the pubs and, up until recently, the pubs all closed at 11 on the dot. So, what happens? Well, you drink as fast as you can, so that by the time 11 comes around, you aren't left feeling like another drink.
Do you think we are used to seeing people drunk in Britain, or do we still get shocked?
It depends, really. But being drunk isn't socially acceptable in most European countries, whereas in the UK, well, in some social circles, quite the reverse is true.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for, but myself and...
Allergies.
Dr. Peterson, you've just published an article about allergies and the fact that they're on the rise.
Yes, that's right.
So, first of all, what kind of allergies are we talking about? Hay fever, asthma?
All allergies, really. An allergy is a physical reaction to a substance. That reaction can be sneezing, an itching, sore eyes, feeling sick, a rash of some kind, like eczema, or breathing difficulties, like asthma.
And are allergies on the rise?
Oh yes, absolutely. There's no doubt about that. When I was at school, there was only one boy in the class who had an inhaler. Now, 30 years later, more than half the kids in my daughter's class have them.
So, why the great increase? Is it our fault?
Sometimes, yes, either directly or indirectly. Our lifestyles have changed a lot, starting from birth. It's a well-known fact that bottle-fed babies are more likely to develop allergies than breastfed babies. Yet fewer mothers breastfeed because they simply don't have the time, or because of practicalities, like wanting to share the feeding with a partner. Then, when our children are toddlers, we smother everything in disinfectant and destroy all traces of germs.
But surely that's a good thing.
No, it's not. Germs are good. Too much cleanliness is bad. Think back to when we were children. We used to make mud pies, splash about in dirty puddles, put all sorts of things into our mouths.
So are you saying we aren't allowing our children's immune systems to develop?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. Our obsessions with cleanliness have gone too far. We need to expose our children to germs so that their defence mechanisms have a chance to develop.
and get stronger.
Hmm.
If they aren't exposed, there's a danger that they'll develop allergies and food intolerances later on.
What about genes? Aren't some allergies genetic?
Yes and no. The jury is still out on that one. Allergy problems do run in the family, but we don't understand why. Scientists have identified cases in families where there's been some kind of genetic mutation which affects the immune system in some way.
Oh.
This might result in members of a family being more prone to allergies, but not necessarily the same allergies. So, Dad might be allergic to milk products, while one child gets hay fever, and another develops an allergy to some sort of skin cream.
And this doesn't explain why there have been such an increase in allergies over the past 10 years or so.
No, it doesn't.
So, what has changed?
Lifestyles, in a nutshell. Mobile phone use. All technology, really. Stress levels are considerably higher than they used to be. We're exposed to more chemicals and toxic substances, diesel fumes, pesticides. One type of allergy that has risen considerably is food intolerance. In some places, an allergy to soya is very common. This is probably because soya is present in so many food products these days, and our bodies haven't had time to adjust to this change. We don't eat in the same way as we used to. Seasonal food is a thing of the past. Now everything is available all year round.
So, to sum up, why are allergies on the rise?
Well, if we're summing up, I'll keep it brief. Too much bottle feeding, an obsession with cleanliness, too few germs and too many convenience foods, too little fresh fruit and veg, and an abuse of out-of-season food all year round. Too many vaccinations and altogether far too much stress.
Dr. Peterson, thank you very much for coming to the studio today. If viewers would like to read Dr. Peterson's report, they can write in to his personal...
Amateur.
Theo, you have set up a number of successful internet-based businesses over the last 5 years. You began working from your university dorm?
Yeah, I was just messing about, really, at first.
It was for fun?
Sure, yeah, exactly. I didn't know 5 years ago that I'd be here today. The thought never crossed my mind.
Would you still describe yourself as an amateur?
Not in the negative sense, obviously, but in the sense that I love what I do, then yeah.
But you do make money.
I can't complain.
Why do you think it's the net that has created so many successful amateurs?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure I agree with you that it has created all the successful amateurs. I mean, there are lots of other examples of people who love what they do and make money out of it. I'm thinking of someone like Michael Eavis, for example, the guy who runs the Glastonbury Festival.
Yeah.
I don't know how much money he makes from what he does, but that's not the important thing. Most of the year he's a farmer, but each year he runs this enormous music festival on the site of his farm. Actually, he doesn't even do it every year. Sometimes he just thinks, no, can't be bothered this year. You know, I think that's genius. Love that attitude. He's only one example, but there are lots of others. People who run record labels or have restaurants or make cheese.
Do you think it's important to love what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. There has to be passion for the product.
So it's the product that's important?
Again, yeah. Get the product right and everything else is simple. The marketing will look after itself. This is why the net has produced so many successful amateurs. The marketing is done by word of mouth, so to speak. People just tell each other about a site that's cool, especially through networking sites like MySpace and Facebook.
Marketing isn't important?
Well, of course it is. I'm sure there are marketing amateurs out there too, people who love what they do. But I firmly believe that you can't market a poor product. That's essential.
Your father was a successful businessman too, and you studied at Cambridge.
Mm-hmm.
Does having such a background help?
I'm from a wealthy family, yeah. I've never denied it. That helps, obviously. It's given me time. Time, above all, is the most important thing. Time to experiment and make mistakes, and not have to worry too much. But that's not a key thing in the rise of the amateur.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I am. Love, not money. That's my motto.
Thanks.
We're here at the Inter-Celtique Festival in Brittany, France, and I'm talking to two as yet little known pipers, Iria Salgado from Galicia.
Hello.
And from Ireland, Ronan Doherty.
Hi.
So, how did you get started?
There's been music in my family for as long as I can remember. I learnt the tin whistle when I was 6, and then, after a year, my father bought me my first set of pipes. But it was an uncle who gave me lessons.
I was 5 when I started. I learned by ear from my father, imitating him like it's always been done. When I was 10, he started putting me in for competitions.
Who have been your musical influences?
Well, Miladoiro, who started it all, and Carlos Núñez, who really put Galician music on the map. But my greatest inspiration has got to be players like Susana Saivarne and Cristina Parto, for showing that women can be out there just as much as the men.
Ronan?
All the obvious names, really. Paddy Keenan from the Bothy Band, Liam O'Flynn, Davy Spillane, who I met recently, though I didn't get to play with him.
What sort of places do you play?
Well, in Dublin, you're spoilt for choice these days. And I have family out in Westport, County Mayo. I'm always there in the holidays, so I often go along and sit in on sessions at Malloy's.
Iria, I know you've started writing your own stuff. How would you categorise your music?
It's always based on the traditional repertoire, but I try to incorporate other Celtic influences as well. And the people I play with are no longer just from my corner of Europe. We have Irish, Cuban and Brazilian guys that come into the group. And so that gets reflected in the music I write.
Ronan, what has been your best gig so far?
Performing at the International Bagpipe Festival in Strachanice last year. The crack was amazing, and the chance to get together with guys from other traditions, Czechs, Breton pipers, Bulgarians, some incredible sounds, really.
Iria, what advice would you give to other women wanting to take up the pipes?
Now is definitely the time. There's a whole new generation coming through. Even though women pipers are still a minority, there's much more acceptance than there was. Nearly half the bagpipe students in Galicia now are girls.
Where can we hear you playing next? Have you got many gigs lined up?
I'm doing a series of dates with the band in the west of Ireland, and then going over to Holland and Germany next March.
I've got a few concerts in Galicia next month, and then I'll be in Zamora in Spain for a week.
Great. Thanks very much. And to play us out, you're going to do a traditional muñeira, followed by a reel.
Good afternoon. Today on Crime Check, we're going to talk about repeat victims. People who are victims of crime more than once. First of all, we bring you the sad story of Ruth and Harold Saunders from Hull, who have had their house burgled no fewer than 8 times in the last 3 years. Worth an entry in the Guinness Book of Records, you might think. But for Ruth and Harold, it's no joke. Ruth, why do you think you've been burgled so many times?
I wish I knew. It's a nightmare. We bought this house because it looks out onto the playing fields, and we thought it was the perfect house for our retirement.
When were you first burgled?
3 years ago, just a week after we'd moved in. It was as if the burglars were waiting for us.
Do you feel sorry that you moved there now?
Oh, definitely. If we had known we were going to have this sort of trouble, we wouldn't be living here. We would have chosen somewhere safer. But now we can't even sell the house because everyone knows the burglars like it. No one will buy it. We can't escape from this neighbourhood. We're just waiting for the next break-in.
Do you know who the burglars are?
We think so, but we can never prove anything. You see, people can watch the house from the playing fields, and there are a number of youths who we see watching the house. They hang around there smoking in the afternoons. I'm frightened to go to the shops in case they break in while I'm away.
Have you tried calling the police?
Oh, yes, several times. But these youths always get away by running into the woods on the other side of the playing fields, and the police don't bother to go after them.
And what have you had stolen?
Oh, all sorts of things on different occasions. They never take much, but they always seem to come back. They've taken the television twice. If we'd known they were going to come back, we wouldn't have bought a new television after the first burglary. But a week after we bought it, the burglars broke in again.
What else have they taken?
Oh, apart from the television and the video, nothing very valuable. But then we don't have anything else which is very valuable. It's annoying, really, and they do a lot of damage when they break in. I sometimes think we should leave a door open. If we left the door open, at least they could come in without doing any damage.
So what are you going to do about this situation?
What can we do about it? We'd be happier if we'd stayed in our old house. If we still lived there, I'm sure we wouldn't have been burgled once. We were there for 40 years without a single problem.
Marilyn Brooks, you are Chief Crime Prevention Officer for South Yorkshire Police. Is there really nothing they can do?
No, there are things they can do, though I must say first that I do feel sorry for them.
Well, what can they do?
If I were them, I'd have had a burglar alarm put in straight away. In fact, I'm surprised the insurance company hasn't insisted on that already.
Well, they have said that, but we can't afford one of those. We only have our pension, and burglar alarms cost thousands of pounds.
Well, have you thought of putting a burglar alarm box on the wall? That puts some thieves off. Also, you should talk to the neighbours and ask them to keep an eye on your home when you're out.
But why do the burglars keep coming back to the Saunders house? I mean, 8 times is a lot, isn't it?
Well, there are several things here. Obviously, it is easy to watch the house from the playing fields, and also burglars tend to talk amongst themselves. They tell each other which houses are easy to break into and what things the houses still have in them. Also, they wait a few months until they think the owners have replaced the things that were stolen. After all, burglars prefer to steal something that's brand new. And another thing you have to consider is that they might...
For many years now, we've been referring to English as a global language, as the language of communication and technology. Everybody seems to be learning English, and it isn't uncommon to see English being used as a means of communication between, let's see, a German scientist and an Italian politician. These days, if you don't know English, you're in danger of being excluded from what's going on in education, at work, and especially in the world of technological advances. Very soon, English will be the second language of all the people in the world. This is happening while I'm speaking to you. We can't be certain of how long the process will take, but there is no doubt that it will happen. And my bet is that it will happen sooner rather than later. First of all, English will be an obligatory subject on every school curriculum throughout the world. By the year 2010, around 2 billion people, that's about a third of the world's population, will speak English as their second language. This isn't my prediction, by the way. This is what the experts say. We can see evidence of these changes all the time. Let's take the Eurovision Song Contest as an example. Whatever we might think of the contest itself, one thing that has changed recently is that now countries can opt to sing in English. In the last festival, 14 of the 25 competing countries asked for the rules to be changed to allow them to sing in English. They argued that singing in their own language would put them at a disadvantage. I suspect that in a few years' time, all 25 countries will be singing in English. And what exactly does all of this mean for native speakers of English? Well, we are already in a minority. If the calculations are correct, then in 10 years' time, majority speakers, that is, non-native English speakers, will outnumber native English speakers by 4 to 1. The two most important Englishes won't be British English and American English. They'll be native English and majority English. So native English speakers will be handicapped. We will be the only people in the world who speak just one language. Because, let's face it, there won't be much of a reason for native English speakers to learn a second language. We, and not the majority English speakers, will be the disadvantaged. As more and more people speak English, it makes sense that they will become more competent. They will start to control more of the English resources being produced, and to have a say in what should or shouldn't be included in dictionaries and language books. This might seem far-fetched, but it is already starting to happen. Let's use Sweden as an example. Their music exports, predominantly English, account for more than 30% of its export income. This exported English is bound to have an effect on English in general. And this is just one small example. So, all of you native English speakers out there, get ready to throw away your phrase books, whether you're planning to visit Eastern Europe or the Himalayas. One thing you won't have to worry about is the language.
Fair trade.
Interview 1.
Hi, good morning.
Morning.
I'm doing some market research about fair trade. I'd like to ask you a few questions about your shopping, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay, so first can I ask what you've got in your bag?
Just doing the week's shopping. Some fruit and veg, a few tins of beans, loaf of bread and a pint of milk. Tea bags and some coffee.
Is the coffee fair trade?
What?
Fair trade?
No, it's Nescafe. What's fair trade?
It's a range of goods that are produced making sure that people in Africa or South America are paid fairly for their work and produce.
Sounds all right. Never seen it, though.
It's more expensive than ordinary coffee.
Ah, well then. This stuff's already expensive. Not sure I could afford that.
Interview 2.
Can I ask what you've got in your bag?
Fruit and nuts, snacks.
All good healthy stuff then?
Yep. Dried apricots, raisins, cashew nuts, and some pistachios. All organic, all fair trade.
Do you always buy fair trade?
Whenever possible, yeah.
Interview 3.
Can I ask what you've got in your bag?
A new top and a pair of jeans. I've been clothes shopping.
Are they fair trade?
What?
Fair trade?
Oh, I thought that was just for coffee and stuff.
No, there are also fair trade clothes.
I don't know about that. Let's have a look. Okay. The jeans were made in Bulgaria. And the top in China.
Do you know if the people who made them were paid fairly for their work?
No, I guess I don't. They were very cheap. I'm not so sure now. Where can you buy fair trade clothes?
A lot of shops carry fair trade lines. You have to check the labels carefully.
Next time I will do.
Interview 4.
Can I ask what you've got in your bag?
Oh, the week's shopping.
You've got lots of chocolate in there.
Yeah, well, got a sweet tooth, haven't I?
Is it fair trade chocolate?
Yeah, of course it is. I always buy fair trade stuff, whenever I can.
The future of Europe. With or without the Constitution.
Welcome to Liverpool in the northwest of England and this week's Youth in Europe discussion coming from John Moores University in the heart of the city. Liverpool grew wealthy thanks to imperial commerce. With the end of the British Empire in the post-war years, the city entered a long period of economic decline. Recently, the city has started to grow again economically. Last year, Liverpool was chosen to be the European Capital of Culture in 2008. I'm Liz Hope, and I'll be finding out what young people in Liverpool think of the European Union and the European Constitution. Pete, do you think the EU has helped Liverpool?
I think so. A lot of the developments in the city have been paid for from EU urban regeneration funds. Albert Dock, the original port area, has been redeveloped. There's the National Maritime Museum, the Tate Art Gallery, and the Beatles Museum. That's my favourite. Anyway, they're all there, and a lot of Liverpudlians and visitors from outside the city go there. It's great. Before, there was just nothing there.
OK, so you think the EU has been good to Liverpool?
Yeah, I'd say so.
What about the European Constitution?
Well, to be honest, I don't know much about it. I know last year they voted against it in France and Belgium. Was it Belgium?
The Netherlands.
Yes, that's it, the Netherlands. Well, what does it change anyway, the Constitution? I mean, we're in the EU now, aren't we? I can't see it making much difference to things.
OK, thanks, Pete. Jackie, what does the EU mean to you?
Well, not a lot, really. Like Pete says, I like going to the Albert Dock, and the Year of Culture should be good for the city and fun too, I hope.
And the Constitution?
To be honest, it means nothing to me at all. I know absolutely nothing about it. How are you supposed to find out about it? How can it affect my life here? I just want to get a job when I finish my course next year.
So you're not interested in what Europe's going to be like in the future?
A bit, I suppose. If it's successful, I guess that might make it easier to get a job. What do we need a constitution for? I mean, the whole EU is working now without one, isn't it?
Effective websites.
I've looked at your website and the overall design and layout is very good. There are just a few aspects that need to be improved so that it's optimized for search engines.
I don't want to sound stupid, but what exactly is search engine optimization?
Oh, don't worry. Please feel free to ask as many questions as you want. I prefer my clients to understand what I'm doing. Search engine optimization is basically making sure that search engines can find your website and then that your potential customers can also find it.
I see. So this doesn't just happen automatically?
No. If a site isn't optimized, it could just get lost out there, as it were.
So what do we need to do?
We need to make sure that your website, and your homepage in particular, includes the relevant keywords.
Just a minute. What are keywords?
Those are the words a person types into a search engine. Your company sells wooden toys, so an obvious keyword phrase is wooden toys.
OK. How do we include them?
We make sure that the content, the text your customer is going to read, includes these words several times. The trick is to make it still sound natural, so that customers aren't put off.
And this will mean that when a customer searches for wooden toys, they're more likely to find my site.
That's right. We also need to think about what other searches your potential customers could be making. For example, child's birthday present, and include these keywords. I'll rewrite all the content to optimize it for keywords.
Great. What else are you going to do?
I need to change your title tags.
What's a title tag?
It's the code that creates the words that appear in the top bar of the browser. At the moment, yours say things like page 2 and page 3. We need to change this so they include your company name and some of the keywords.
Anything else?
Yes, the search engines prefer sites that have new content added to them, so I suggest that we regularly update the information on your site. For example, you could highlight a different toy every month, or run special campaigns at different times of the year, such as Christmas. This will keep the search engine spiders visiting your site.
Spiders?
Yes. A spider is a program which searches the internet for web pages. Then it sends the page to a search engine. So search engines use spiders to find new and changed pages. It's important that spiders can find your site.
Well, I didn't know there were spiders on the internet. Now, another thing, I've heard about...
English for tourism. 3. Types of accommodation.
Good afternoon. How can I help you?
We're interested in a holiday in Wales. We'd like to travel around and see a lot of the countryside. We'd also like to do quite a bit of walking.
We don't want a package tour.
Well, that's fine. I can give you information on the types of places you can stay and help you book rooms in advance.
That would be perfect.
Are you wanting self-catering accommodation or accommodation with meals provided?
A mixture of the two, I think. The main thing is that we want to get away from towns and cities.
Well, you'll find that Wales can offer a variety of serviced accommodation away from the crowds. There are country hotels which are usually quiet and in extensive grounds.
I imagine they would be expensive.
Yes, they can be. A cheaper option in a rural location would be farm accommodation. This is similar to a guest house or B&B, but on a working farm. You would get breakfast and possibly an evening meal provided.
What options are there if we want to go self-catering?
There are lots of country cottages, restored farmhouses, even castles available on a self-catering basis. You will probably find, though, that you have to book for a week at a time, so they're probably not suitable if you want to tour around Wales.
No. What about hostels?
I'm not sure I'd want to sleep in a dormitory.
Many hostels nowadays have private rooms as well as dormitories. Or you could try camping. There are plenty of campsites in Wales.
Maybe we could hire a caravan.
Yes, most campsites allow both tents and touring caravans. That could be an ideal way to see the countryside.
We'd love to spend a few days in the mountains. Are there places to stay there?
Yes, there are bunkhouses, which are like hostels but simpler. And in the really remote areas, there are camping barns. These are very basic and just provide a place to sleep. You need to take everything with you, sleeping bag, food, even a torch.
How do we find out where all these places are?
I'll get you some brochures, and you can get a lot of information from the Welsh Tourist Board's website.
Thanks very much. We'll have to go away and think about exactly what we want to do.
I think it's very important for us to become part of the EU. I think Turkey should join by 2008 at the latest.
I don't agree with you at all. I really just don't understand the point or see any benefits that it would bring us.
Well, greater economic stability for a start. That's the most obvious and most important thing. If we started to use the euro, we would get that stability.
I'm not sure. Look at what happened in other European countries when the euro came in. They all had terrible inflation. I don't want that to happen in Turkey too.
Inflation wasn't just caused by the euro. There were other reasons. Anyway, at least having the euro would make travelling easier. We wouldn't have to change money and pay commission rates to banks.
But we risk becoming the same as everyone else. Same money, same TV channels, same films, same music, McDonald's everywhere.
That's American and nothing to do with Europe.
Sure, but it's all part of the same process.
Oh, nonsense! Come off it. If Turkey wants to become a modern nation with a strong voice in international affairs, it must become part of the European Union.
I'm not so sure about that. We have other traditions. We are more Balkan and Mediterranean. We have a different history.
Europe is a multicultural continent. Every country in Europe has a different history.
Well, that may be, but perhaps it's not up to us to decide. Perhaps Europe doesn't want us.
Well, you're quite happy to be part of Europe when Fenerbahce are doing well in the Champions League.
As a professional sportsman, I'm always interested in the latest developments in my field. So, technology is very important to me, and I'm very interested in it. I'd be fascinated to know how the results of this research team's work could have practical applications, especially if it helps me win races. I don't believe that it's only the best technology that wins races. It's just not true. You can take somebody like Michael Schumacher, and if he has a bad day, he still loses, even though he's driving the same car. Of course, you also have to be in top condition, very, very fit. I train in the gym as much as an Olympic athlete probably does. So that's another way in which even having the best car won't necessarily help you win. If you're not in shape, you won't be able to take 4 or 5 hours of the intense physical work it takes to drive a Grand Prix. So much depends on things like temperature, time of day, the weather, your own psychological condition, the support you get from your team, even the fans on the stands. The psychological aspect is crucial, very, very important. To be a top racing driver, you have to have incredibly good concentration and be able to remain calm in a crisis. I get a boost from my team, and also when I see fans with flags on the stands.
The gas industry. Next on tonight's business investment news, we'll be looking at the gas industry. Many analysts, energy companies and their investors believe that gas will soon become as vital to the world's economy as petroleum is today. And we've certainly seen the demand for gas surge in recent years. One of the main reasons for this is the search for more environmentally friendly fuels. Gas burns much more cleanly than oil or coal. In fact, it's the cleanest burning fossil fuel, which makes it a very popular choice for new power stations all over the world. However, until quite recently, it was difficult, if not impossible, for the global gas industry to develop. The reason for this? Well, the problem is that gas, by its very nature, isn't as easy to transport as oil and coal. Obviously, it's gaseous at room temperature, so a system of pipelines is needed to get it to the customer. This meant in the past it could only be sold to customers who lived near a natural gas supply. It was too expensive to transport it very long distances via pipelines. Fortunately, there is now a process which makes it easier to transport gas over longer distances. It's called liquefied natural gas. Put simply, gas can now be frozen into liquid form and transported to distant countries in refrigerated tankers. When the LNG is delivered, it is heated and converted back into gas form. Then it is supplied to customers using local pipelines. Having said that, there are two main risks associated with LNG, financial and political. Firstly, the cost of producing and shipping LNG today is still higher than transporting oil, although rapid innovations are reducing the costs. For instance, bigger tankers can now be used. What's more, the energy industry is expected to invest a massive $100 billion in LNG over the next 10 years, despite the high capital costs. Secondly, Russia and the former Soviet Union hold the world's largest natural gas reserves. Some analysts are therefore concerned that Russia will have a high level of control over the global LNG market within the next decade. So, as we can see, there are political and financial risks associated with the LNG business. Yet the potential profits are enormous for energy firms with the capital to develop LNG projects, and many experts believe that gas will be the dominant fuel for at least another 50 years.
Global workers.
One of the biggest challenges facing employers and educators today is the rapid advance of globalization. The marketplace is no longer national or regional, but extends to all corners of the world, and this requires a global-ready workforce. Universities have a large part to play in preparing students for the 21st century labour market by promoting international educational experiences. The most obvious way universities can help develop a global workforce is by encouraging students to study abroad as part of their course. Students who have experienced another culture firsthand are more likely to be global ready when they graduate. There are, of course, well-established international undergraduate student exchange schemes, such as Erasmus, which operates within Europe, and the exchange partnerships that exist between universities around the world. The Fulbright program in the US enables graduate students to study and conduct research abroad. We need to expand and add to such schemes to enable many more students to study abroad. Global workforce development doesn't always have to involve travel abroad, however. If students learn another language and study other cultures, they will be more global ready when they graduate. It's important to point out that students also need to have a deep understanding of their own culture before they can begin to observe, analyse and evaluate other cultures. In multicultural societies, people can study each other's cultures to develop intercultural competencies, such as critical and reflective thinking and intellectual flexibility. This can be done both through the curriculum and through activities on campus outside of the classroom, such as art exhibitions and lectures from international experts. Many universities are already embracing this challenge and providing opportunities for students to become global citizens. Students themselves, however, may not realize that when they graduate, they will be competing in a global labour market, and universities need to raise awareness of these issues amongst undergraduates.
How to treat your staff.
So really, what we're talking about most of the time is simply a case of common sense. There's nothing revolutionary or even new here. The trouble is that most managers tend to forget about developing their own managerial skills as soon as they become a manager. There is a certain sense of irony in this, don't you think? Well, let's move on and talk about a few more of these issues. One thing that I've come across again and again is the situation in which managers pretend that change is not happening. But when change is happening, this is the worst thing they can do. It's like burying one's head in the sand. Your staff will know that something is up and wonder why you're being secretive, or worse, dishonest. So, communicate. Tell your staff exactly what is happening and give them opportunities to ask questions. Everybody will come out winning because honesty is always the best policy. Sharing information is a golden rule of management. Sometimes there's a tendency to keep things to oneself, but this isn't usually the best. Imagine a situation where you're thinking about approaching a new client, for example. If we only communicate this information to our immediate management team, then we might well be neglecting to tell somebody who is potentially the ideal person to come up with an idea to make contact with this new client for whatever reason. There are other scenarios too. Work can get duplicated and, even worse, people can get offended. We don't want to get anybody's back up. Staff need to feel that they are trusted to work independently and manage their own workloads. It's a proven fact that workers in this environment are happier and are more productive. As managers, we should learn to micromanage, to make sure that staff know exactly what they're supposed to be doing and then just let them get on with it. We should never breathe down their necks. That isn't going to help anybody. Another very important thing to remember is that your employees may not understand your jargon or management speak. And why should they? You might have spent weeks discussing issues and making decisions. Weeks when you were using acronyms with other members of the management team. When you finally come around to communicating these ideas with the rest of the department, the terms are familiar to you. But remember that the terms are new for everybody else. So explain what the terminology means. Or better still, avoid using it. Because people who use jargon all the time come over as being patronising. As we get to the end of this talk, I'd like to mention something that, for me, is probably the most important piece of advice of all. Don't forget your sense of humour. Being able to share a joke at work is priceless. We have to be able to laugh at ourselves too, and not take ourselves too seriously. Of course, there is a time and place for humour, but a good manager will instinctively know when the time is right.
So, the first thing then, as you know, is that we've seen our market share slowly declining over the last few years. The figures aren't disastrous, so I don't think there's any need to panic, but we do need to think carefully about why this is happening and do what we can to reverse the trend as soon as possible.
Looking at these figures, I see what you mean. So the first thing to do is look at the overall context.
Have you drawn up a pest analysis?
Yes. Here it is. As you can see, we feel the political situation to be fairly stable at the moment in this country, though the international climate is obviously something different.
And there's not much we can do about that.
No. And the problem is here, where it starts to affect the economy. There are no real signs that this is happening yet, but people may perceive that an economic downturn is coming.
Which leads to the social factors.
Yes, families are spending less. However, most of our customers and our target market are young, single people, not families.
So next, we should do a SWOT.
Sure, our strengths are still the level of recognition of our brand, which is increasing. We were moving from a niche market into a mass one, but now that process seems to have stopped.
A weakness?
Perhaps we aren't properly prepared for such a move.
We are up against some major competitors, Nike, Adidas.
Yes, that's obviously the biggest threat here.
Can we compete with these names?
Do you think they're worried about us?
And how can we find out?
Well, there are several ways. We could use some industrial espionage.
You mean spying on them? I hope you're joking.
Yes. Well, I suggest the best thing to do is to commission some market research. We can never really know what our competitors are doing, but if we understand the market better, at least we can make informed decisions about them.
Environmental science. Hydraulics.
So, Mr. Clark, we've heard lots of worrying details about water shortage around the world, and you've explained a little bit about some particular case studies. Maybe we could end on a more optimistic note, and you could tell us a bit about what can be done to ease this problem. What is being done?
Yes, of course. I should start off by explaining that there are two basic approaches to water management. The first is based on managing the supplies that already exist. We call this supply management. And the second is related to demand management. Sometimes solutions overlap, but this distinction is a useful starting point.
So, could you give us some examples of each one?
Yes. Let's start off with supply management. Sometimes the problem isn't that there is no water, it's actually that the existing water is mismanaged, wasted, or just lost. So projects are set up to capture surface water and to store it for later use. Groundwater also falls into this category. We are continually looking for new ways to exploit and extract groundwater.
And what about the possibility of using seawater?
Good point. There are desalination plants around the world where they transform seawater and make it suitable for agriculture.
Yes.
Also, there are lots of new water-sharing agreements being drawn up between neighbouring countries. Because in lots of cases the water is there, but the people just don't have access to it. And finally, there's pollution, of course. A lot of cases that we deal with are cases of polluted water that can be used if it is cleaned up effectively.
And could you tell us a little bit about demand management?
Yes, that's a much more complicated issue because we have to deal with all sorts of factors that influence the action we eventually take.
What kind of factors are we talking about here?
Each country has its own unique options depending on its levels of development, its hydrological situation, of course, political and social influences, financial resources, and many other factors.
Oh, yes, I understand. But when you've managed to cut through the red tape and you've got the necessary funds, what sorts of things can you do in a place which doesn't actually have any water?
Well, there are conventional solutions such as irrigation projects, water recycling plants, and, in some cases, mobile water tanks. Then there are other quite ingenious but unconventional ideas, such as towing icebergs and melting them near water consumers.
Really?
Yes. It sounds crazy, but it's already starting to happen.
Well...
In some cases, water is being regularly towed by sea tankers, for example, to islands without water resources.
So, it seems as though at the end of the day, the solutions are out there. It's just a case of finding the money to put them into practice.
Exactly.